Chapter 23. Hunted. John Hamman, 31. Cretaceous. Jenny was awake early, lost in thought, waiting for the dawn to come. She could not get back to sleep, got up, turned on the headlamp, and started to fix herself a meal. Now, in the early morning hours when it was cold, would probably be the safest time to risk cooking. Nevertheless, she made sure her gun was at hand. It was good to have a hot meal, even if it was made from dehydrated eggs. Some things were a crime against nature. No one had ever managed a decent dehydrated breakfast meal. By the time she was done, the horizon was beginning to lighten. She had the camp packed up before the sun crested. As its warmth lit the world, she was already on the move. The terrain was changing. It was becoming a bit hillier, and she thought the slope was trending downward. She was seeing erosion features moving in the same direction she was going. All good signs. Then she came to the edge of a step. It was a small shelf, and then the hillside dropped away gently to a lowland with heavier vegetation. She recognized what this was. It was like in Utah. A large lake had been there thousands of years ago, and this had once been the shoreline. In Utah, a geologic feature had given way, and the lake had drained in a flood, cutting through the ridge that had contained it. Looking down, she could see where the richer silt fed the thicker growth of ferns. The wind had scoured the richer soil from hilltops and ridges and concentrated it in the lowlands between. The plant life grew much heavier there. Somewhere out there would be the river. There would be more wildlife, more dinosaurs from now on. She took out a monocular and scanned the land below, but couldn't spot any movement. She knew they would be there, but didn't know what they would be. She cycled the action on the shotgun, ejecting the bird shot she had in the chamber and loading a round of double-aught buckshot. Any meeting in there would get very personal, very fast. She pocketed the bird shot and reached up to pull another round of buck from the sling on her shoulder to top off the magazine. She was as ready as she could be. Jenny hopped off the shelf and started down the largest of the ridges, following on its crest to stay out of the heavier foliage for as long as she could. She kept the shotgun at low ready, now with the safety off. When she got down into the bottomlands, it was not as dense as she feared. It did not really hinder her movement too badly. Sometimes she dodged around denser thickets. The issue was that it shortened her sight lines. Most of the surrounding area was still covered in various forms of fern, but they grew much taller. Rather than being to her knee or waist, here the average height was her head, or taller. Some things reached over 20 feet. She made a greater effort to move quietly and focused on her hearing. Sometimes your ears or your nose would alert you before you could see your quarry. She recalled stalking a lion in tall grass. She had been young. She had not done that again. This time, she felt more like the prey. For all her misgivings, nothing happened. At least, not at once. She went on like that most of the day. Her movement was slow but steady. She felt it was better to get there alive than to rush to an early demise. Her feeling of unease never left her. It was late in the afternoon when she heard it for the first time. It was a bark, but higher pitched than she would expect. It came from some distance behind her. She froze and listened intently. Something else, an answer from behind her, but off to her right. Something was following her. Something was hunting her, and it was not alone. What to do? Running was pointless. Any predator here could easily run her down. She had to make a stand, and whatever it was, she had to kill it. She needed longer sight lines to shoot. Looking around, she headed to her left, slightly uphill. The ground was a bit higher there, and she hoped the cover would be less. She didn't have any hope of eluding them by changing direction. If they were following her trail from that far back, They were probably following her scent. It wasn't much of a hill to die on, but the higher ground was drier, and the ferns grew a bit lower. She would have more room. She heard them again, at least 3, maybe more. That was fine. If they wanted to be assholes, she was ready for them. As she moved onto the higher, more open ground, they seemed to hold back. They preferred to surround and corner their prey in the brush. She guessed that most of their prey tried to stay in cover. Jenny was not playing that game. The ground was rockier here, as the wind had blown away more of the silt, leaving behind the larger stones. Nothing grew higher than her waist, leaving no cover for them. She finally got a look at her pursuers. One of them came forward to the edge of the heavier brush. It was behind a large cycad. All she could really see was its head. If she didn't know better, she might have thought it to be a bird at first glance. It was feathered with a heavier plume on its head that ran down the back of its neck, but the mouth was a dinosaur's, not the beak of a bird. She was willing to bet it was full of teeth. Based on the height of the head, it was a little taller than her. Looking down, she could see one of its hind feet past the trunk of the cycad. She could see the claws, including the one particularly long, sickle-shaped one on the inner toe. It tapped that toe impatiently, eager for the hunt, the kill. It was a theropod, one of the raptors. It stared at her, letting itself be seen. It was trying to flush her, to make her run. It wanted to run her down. That was probably how it hunted most of its prey, and why she knew above all else she could not run. She had to flip the script. She had to make them move. She could hear other movements. It had friends. She could not see them, but knew they would be moving to surround her. Time to make them play her game. Let's see how they like this. Jenny made sure the selector switch for the magazine was to the right for the magazine full of buckshot. She wished that both magazines held double aught. She raised the neosted and placed the sights right on the creature's face.
Smile and wait for the flash.
The gun bucked back into her shoulder. These were not light loads. The head disappeared behind the cycad with a screech, higher pitched than she would have expected. She saw a tail whipping the ferns as it thrashed on the ground. Automatically, she cycled the action, feeding another round of buck. The dinosaur continued to scream and writhe in the underbrush. She pivoted, looking for a charge. Nothing happened. Perhaps that had given them pause. She pulled another round off the sling and topped off the magazine. Shotgun matches were all about the reload. Modern animals were afraid of gunfire, at least the ones that had been hunted. Even animals that had never encountered guns were startled by the noise, but they did not know to fear it. The charge came from the right, low and fast like a lion, kicking up dust as it accelerated faster than a racehorse. She fired at the attacker and hit it, but it didn't even slow. It was bipedal. All the locomotion in this thing was in the hind legs. Hitting the shoulder didn't cause it to crash and roll like a lion or even turn it. She cycled the action and dropped to her knee for a lower shot. The gun kicked again as she fired into its chest, but it was too late. The thing struck her full speed, bowling her over and sending them both tumbling across the ground. She was down. Another one came from her left, low and fast. She fired from the ground, hitting it in its chest and shoulder, watching the feathers explode and leaving a red hole. Her second shot went right down its wide-open mouth, and the raptor piled into the ground. She emptied another round into the raptor that had knocked her down. It was trying to get up to come for her when her shot opened up its chest. The dinosaur flopped backward. She scrambled under the weight of her pack to get up on her feet. 2 more were behind her. They had stopped and were watching. Her first shot caught the one on the left in the neck, and it collapsed on the ground. The other jumped sideways, and her shot missed, or at least she could not see any sign of a hit. Cursing, she pumped the action again, but it clicked empty. She had to flip the lever on the top of the gun to the other side to feed the number 4. Her target was staring at its packmate. She fired 2 rounds into its face, and it fell back flailing and screaming, its whole head a ruin. Jenny ran the action again, wishing she had loaded both magazines with double-aught buckshot. She turned in time to see one of the raptors launch itself. Its leap seemed impossibly high. It was coming down on her, its hind legs pulled up in front, and she could see those big claws cocked back, ready for the kill. She turned and lunged, trying to get out from under it. Too late. It landed on her back, knocking her to the ground. She sprawled on her face with the weight of the dinosaur on top of her. She could hear her pack rip open as everything spilled out around her. The sling kept the shotgun close, and she grabbed it, twisting under the animal to try to bring it to bear. All she saw was wide-open jaws coming for her head, and she shoved the gun between them to block the bite. The jaws clamped down sideways with tremendous force, crushing the magazine tubes and the barrel. At the same time, she felt a ripping pain in the back of her leg as one of its claws found its mark, opening up the back of her thigh. Screaming, she turned her head away, burying her face in her shoulder as she pulled the trigger. The barrel exploded, rupturing in the raptor's mouth when a 3-inch magnum load fired with nowhere to go. Searing pain erupted in her shoulder, neck, and the back of her head. All she could hear was ringing in her left ear. She was disoriented. She tried to orient herself and think through the pain and ringing in her head. She found the fast tech buckle on the chest strap of the pack and slid out of it, or what remained of it. She crawled away from the dinosaur that was thrashing on the ground, hitting the release to drop the ruined weapon. Its mouth and jaws were mostly gone. She crawled, incapable of much else. Jenny stumbled to her feet, trying to draw the Browning pistol from the holster on her leg. It was hard to hold the pistol steady with the ringing in her head. Another pursuer was circling around her. It was more cautious, but smelling the blood, knowing it had the kill. Her left leg didn't want to work. She could feel blood running down her leg. She brought the gun up, trying to aim, but she couldn't seem to hold it steady. The dinosaur circled her. Were there others nearby? Would they be attracted to the noise or repulsed by it? The smell of blood and death filled the air. She knew anything in the area would be drawn here, looking for a meal. If she could get away. She held the handgun with both hands. The gun was loaded with hollow points. She had to deal with her leg. All this creature had to do was wait. She heard barking from the west. More were on their way. This was not good, but it was what saved her. The dinosaur, hearing more of its kind approaching, tried to move in to secure its own kill. It charged. Holding her ground, she fired with both hands. It was all she could do to empty the gun, center of mass. She only got 7 rounds off before being bowled over by its charge. They rolled backward together, ending on their sides. She was able to bring the gun up between them under its chin, and pulled the trigger 3 more times, firing up into its skull. Blood sprayed in her face, and her left eye burned as something from the muzzle blast struck her skin. All she could hear was ringing. The animal spasmed, clawing frantically as she rolled away from it. She crawled blindly away from the dying animal. Looking up, she forced her eyes open and crawled on all 4s into a mass of ferns. She made it about 30 yards until she was at least out of sight. She fumbled with the med kit on the back of her belt. She managed to pull the zipper, and a Ziploc baggie with a pressure bandage and packets of quick clot dropped into her hand. She reached around her leg and tore the pants leg open. Peering around to her left, she could make out the wound with her right eye. The gash was about 4 inches long, bleeding freely, but at least it wasn't pumping. She tore open the larger package and pulled out the syringe, yanking the cap off the end, and gritted her teeth as she pushed the end into her wound. It raked down the back of her leg, turning into a deeper puncture at the bottom. She pushed in the plunger, irrigating the wound, and tore open the bandage. She paced the sponge, impregnated with quick clot, over the wound, and holding it closed as well as she could, wrapped it tightly with the pressure bandage. She downed 2 of the capsules of wide-spectrum antibiotics from a sealed packet. It hurt, but the bleeding stopped. The pain gave her the clarity to start hobbling off her hill and down into the thicker brush. She needed distance. She had to break contact. She made it 100 yards when she heard their calls. They had found her kills. Maybe that would keep them busy. Would they eat their own dead? She collapsed against the trunk of a cycad. She had lost her pack and most of her gear. The only gun she had left was the high power, and it was down to a little over 2 magazines of ammunition. She had her father's belt with his knife and canteen on it. The batteries were in the cargo pocket on her right thigh, and the device in her left. The bandage was controlling the bleeding, but she looked down at the blood on her leg and boot. She could not afford to be leaving such a large blood trail. She scrubbed her boot and lower pants leg with dirt, trying to clean the blood off. She washed her hands with the sandy soil, trying to get them clean and remove the smell of her own blood. She had to move. They seemed to still be in the clearing. She could hear more calls now, but sooner or later, one of them would find her trail. She pushed herself up to her feet. She had to get away from here. Her leg would support her, but did not work well. The muscles of her quadriceps were fine. She could push her leg straight, but the muscles on the backside of her thigh were not taking any orders. Good enough. She hobbled away to the east. Somewhere out there was the river. She heard the barking of the dinosaurs behind her. At first, they seemed to still be at the site of the battle, but soon it was clear that some of them were following her. She heard them calling behind her to both the left and right. She thought she was starting to recognize their hunting calls. Time to pick up the pace. That was when she came to the edge of the feeding area. Suddenly, the foliage opened up before her. It was as if something had mowed down and plowed the ground before her. Something had eaten all the ground cover in a stretch several hundred yards wide. The ferns had been bitten off at ground level. The larger plants and trees had been torn up by their roots and were half-eaten. Something, or a whole herd of them, had grazed everything down to almost bare ground. She heard the barking grow closer behind her. She had nowhere to go. Jenny started to run as best she could across the ground. She would not die here. Then she saw it, a nearby mound. Maybe, if she could only make it there before they broke cover. It was big, but was there enough of it? No one had ever seen it before. Only the ones from carnivores had been preserved. It wasn't like a cow patty. It was balls, more like from a deer or rabbit. They were about the size of basketballs and dark green with the fiber of the plants they ate. It was a big pile of sauropod scat. It had to be. Nothing else could have produced something this massive. It must have been standing and still grazing as it relieved itself. She made her way around to the far side, looking for some kind of hole or gap. She started to burrow in, pushing the balls to the side and sliding in between them. Pulling them back over her, she curled inside the mound. The smell? It wasn't really the smell as much as the air. The smell was so thick it seemed to displace the air. It was hard to breathe. Could she asphyxiate in this mound? What an ignoble death. It might be better to go down fighting. Those thoughts were driven from her mind when she heard them. She could hear the barking coming closer on all sides now. They seemed to be passing her. Then she heard one right outside her hole. A shadow passed over her. She could see it through the gaps between the balls as it blocked out the sun. It barked and then continued on around the pile, circling it. Then silence. The sounds of the hunt seemed to move farther away. She had no idea where they were. She couldn't risk climbing out of her hole. It seemed hard to get enough air. Her head began to spin, and darkness closed in around her.